Hello, good evening.
Hi, Hannah. How are you?
I'm so well, thank you. It's so lovely to be here with you guys.
I am so glad you are. And I'm also glad that you all had daylight savings time, so it's not quite as crushing of a time difference.
Yeah.
Poor Father Sam joined us a few weeks ago and it was midnight. So,
Well, I'm so grateful to be here and so grateful that it is that little bit earlier as well.
we've known each other at least virtually for some years now, but
Mm.
do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Um, this won't be very interesting, but um, so my name is Hannah and I'm 25. I'm from a small county, or rather a large county, area-wise, but population-wise, very small, in the middle of England. But I've lived in London for the last 7 or so years, where I've been involved in ministry both in the East End and in West London, in kind of very different contexts. So Father Rick and I met when I was a member of the community of St Anselm, which is this very strange kind of new monastic community at Lambeth Palace that the Archbishop of Canterbury is the prior of, or the abbot. And it's just an opportunity for young people to really explore spirituality, and for people of all different wings of the church to come together and spend a year loving each other and being with each other. And it's amazing, and it was one of the best years of my life.
Wow. That was like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, it's scary.
Wow. So you don't
So,
hang out in palaces anymore, or not as frequently?
you know, it's disappointing.
That
Yeah.
is. So what are you doing right now, like in life?
So right now, the plan was to be at seminary this year, and then in kind of late May, June, I was praying about it a lot and reflecting a lot, and I just thought, Lord, can I have one more year? And God was incredible in His provision, and different kind of gates opened to various paths. And so, to cut a long story short, this year I'm doing a postgraduate certificate in education, with the view that at some point in the future this will help me to be a school chaplain full time, because at least here in the UK that's a difficult thing to be able to do. And if I'm going to be ordained in the next few years, I'm going to have, 50 years or so of being ordained. And I don't think, as much as I love parish ministry, I don't think I want to be in parish ministry for the rest of my life with no
Right.
breaks.
And so school ministry is
Mm.
where your heart is at?
Yeah, both of my parents are educators. They're both teachers, so it's always been kind of spoken over me that I was gonna end up in
Wow.
school somehow, teaching somehow. And yeah, I feel that's a really important part of my vocation.
I lived in England for a while, and I taught in
Mm.
a school for a year, Tilehurst in Reading, and that was one of the things that was most surprising to me about that experience was that there was a chaplain that was associated with the government school, and came in and ran a Christian club, and I was like, wow, you like can't do this in America, and I was pretty intrigued and impressed.
Yeah, I think it's one of the joys of having the established church is that it not only kind of opens doors for the Church of England, but also for different faiths as well. It makes it a lot more kind of commonplace, I guess,
Yeah.
to have chaplains in schools and stuff like that.
I've been asking everybody that I've been inviting on this, how is COVID impacting your life and your ministry right now?
I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like even though I've been just as busy, I feel like I've slowed down a lot, and that's been kind of a blessing in disguise, really. I think before COVID, and maybe what COVID made a lot of us in ministry realize was that the rate at which we were working was just not particularly sustainable and not particularly healthy. Um, And I know for sure that my boundaries were not great, and I wasn't good at enforcing them. And I almost took pride in the fact that I was, working on my rest day and stuff like that. And pride is a very ugly thing, it's a deadly sin. And so even though I'm just as busy, I've slowed down and I've realized this is so much more sustainable.
Good for you. Oh,
Mm.
that's good. I'm not sure I've got that learning yet. For a while, I felt like I kicked into like more overgear because I had
Mm.
to like figure out how to do everything different. But yeah, I guess I have learned to rest a little bit more. But
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's the weight of being the incumbent, I guess, that I just didn't have.
right, right. Yeah, like all of a sudden we got to get this service online. Oh my gosh. How do we
And
do that?
you're where the stop is at. So it's kind of, it weighs more heavily on your shoulders, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I think in some ways ministry has become more personal. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like I'm not just seeing things as ticking boxes anymore. For a while, I felt like I was just going through the motions with things, and I knew exactly what I had to do and when I had to do it. And what COVID and being away, like physically away from people, has done has has repersonalized ministry for me, and really helped with the bonds and the relationship side of things.
I agree. I feel like I have a lot more stronger relationships with a lot more people in the congregation. And I think part of it was like everything got disrupted. So you couldn't just go on autopilot and muscle memory. Like everything was very intentional. And because of that, like you just have really deep conversation and prayer with people. We started
Yeah.
a prayer group that like we just had never had before, which was, oh, here's Father Sam.
Oh,
um,
thing.
so yeah, so I feel like that the jostling of everything was ended up being kind of good.
Yeah,
So good. So you have a devotion for us?
I do.
Okay.
Um, and it is on the 22nd chapter of Matthew's Gospel, which I believe you heard in church on Sunday.
We did.
So I've been thinking and praying about this. Um, so in this gospel, we witness a conversation between a group of Pharisees and Jesus. And in this conversation, a lawyer says to Jesus, "What is the great commandment?" So they're trying to trip Jesus up here. In England, we would say they've snookered him almost. They've got him in this corner, and anything he says will benefit them, and it will defeat him. So Jesus says in response to this, that very famously, love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. And I suppose this feels like a sigh of relief for us. This doesn't sound too bad. This doesn't sound like, giving all our money away and selling all our things. This doesn't sound like staying up all night to study and pray. This doesn't sound like abstaining from all those things that we really enjoy. Just loving God and loving people. How hard can that be? It strikes me every time I think and I speak about Pharisees and Sadducees. It's just how much of them I see in myself, and lots of other people I know too. They're often framed as self-righteous and hypocritical, but I think it's important to remember that they were really well-meaning. They were really faithful. They sought after God unashamedly. And if I can be described in those terms, then I'm thrilled about that. But there is this other side to the Pharisees, and we see it in the Gospels. We see it in particular in this passage, the side that is quick to judge, the side that is slow to give grace, the side that is maybe lacking in understanding. And it's a side that, if I'm being really honest, I do see in myself more than I'd care to admit. So the irony of the Pharisees and the Sadducees is that they are seeking God so hard, They are seeking God so profoundly. And yet when God is right in front of them, they don't recognize him. And I think, again, so many of us can be guilty of that. When we fail to obey that second greatest of commandments, to love our neighbor as ourselves, arguably, this is what we're doing. We are failing to love our neighbors. And when we do that, we are failing to see and failing to love God's image in them. God is tangible in our neighbor. God is touchable and servable and lovable in our neighbor. He is real and tangible and lovable in our neighbor who plays their music too loudly at night. And he is tangible and lovable in the way that we choose to approach that situation. He is lovable in our neighbor who hasn't seen anyone all week. And he is real and lovable in the phone call that we could make to them. God is real and lovable and tangible and servable in the homeless person on the street and the choice that we make in the moment. Do we engage with them, or do we put our heads down and walk by? God is real and lovable in our neighbor who thinks and sees the world differently, and dare I say, votes differently to us, in the language that we use when we speak about people on the other side, in our willingness to not only tolerate but embrace those people. So the question that's been on my mind a lot over the last few months, both in my ministry and in my personal life, has been, what does it look like to love my neighbor in the middle of a scary pandemic? And this is especially, I think, prominent for me right now, as it looks like the UK will be heading back into a major scale lockdown. There are people in England, there are my neighbours, who refuse to acknowledge the gravity of the situation that we're in, who are convinced that COVID is this big global government conspiracy, and they're willing to take chances and put other people at risk. And my response is that even if it's true, and for the record, I don't think this is true, but even if it's true that this is some big conspiracy, I can go to sleep at night knowing that I've done my best to love my neighbour by wearing a mask, by social distancing, by using hand sanitizer religiously, by not taking risks with other people's health. And here I am, once again, sounding like a Pharisee, sounding self-righteous, prioritizing law over grace. And I do think it's true that keeping our neighbours safe and trying to protect them the best we can is totally an important way of obeying that commandment to love them as ourselves, and in turn obeying that first great commandment, loving God with our hearts, our minds and our souls. But that person who is not behaving as responsibly as we'd like, that person we think is taking risks and being irresponsible, that is our neighbour too. And the commandment to love our neighbour extends to them. So it's hard not to be angry when we see people disobeying the rules and having what we might call, little regard for others. But we know from Jesus's approach to people time and time again in the Gospels that he doesn't condemn, but rather he comes to listen and educate and ultimately love. And that's the model that I am trying to follow. And that's where we might find love difficult, because this is where we might find it requires some self-sacrifice. And it's hard to love, and it's hard to like people that you're angry with. And if we're being honest, it's sometimes really hard to love people that we disagree with. But it's good news for us, as much as it is for those people that we do disagree with, that Jesus doesn't come to condemn, because it means that he doesn't condemn us when we disobey those two great commandments. When he commands us to love our neighbours as ourselves, he does so knowing that we are complicated, and that our neighbours are complicated, and that life is complicated, and that love is really complicated. When he commands us, to love him, with all our hearts, our souls and our minds, he does so knowing that perfect love is beyond us. And I hope this doesn't sound too much like doom and gloom. This is good news, because it's always good news with Jesus. The good news is that one day this pandemic will be over, and our lives will go from this strange new normality to an even newer normality, with new mercies and new hope, and I pray a real sense of appreciation for life and its new adventures. The good news is that even in those times when we don't quite get it right and we find ourselves not really loving our neighbours, not really loving God, God still loves us. God still loves our neighbours, even the ones who, for some reason, find it acceptable to blast Dua Lipa at 3 a.m. Don't get me wrong, I love Dua Lipa, but there's a time and a place. I'm sure you'll agree.
3 a.m., not it. Yes.
Right? And that love of God, that perfect love, is our sustenance, and it is our provision in these times where things feel troubling. And it is our provision and our sustenance in times of peace and times of ease. Pandemic or no pandemic, God's love remains perfect. And maybe even more importantly, God's love remains. Amen.
Amen.